She's the one that came up with the idea and wrote the initial screenplay. And it was my sister Joie who insisted that the story be told through the eyes of a 10-year-old girl.
He's the little ringleader. He makes these other kids that sit on the stoop do the same.
How dare you accuse my son of ill-doing? He does no such thing.
Yes!
30 years after it premiered, Crooklyn remains one of the most misunderstood films in Spike Lee's entire body of work. When audiences walked into theaters in May 1994 expecting another provocative, socially charged Spike Lee joint, what they found instead was something warmer and considerably more personal. However, beneath everything visible on screen was an entire second story, one built from real grief, studio compromise, and a cast whose trajectories after the film ranged from Oscar nominations to complete withdrawal from the industry. What was happening behind the scenes? Join us as we pull back the curtain on what the Crooklyn cast has finally revealed about what most fans never figured out. The real family grief that most viewers missed entirely. The first thing to understand about Crooklyn, the thing that reframes the entire viewing experience once it is known, is that the film is not simply inspired by Spike Lee's childhood. It is a direct attempt by three siblings to process the death of their mother, and by their own admission, an attempt that did not fully succeed in doing what it set out to do. The screenplay was originally conceived by Joy Lee, Spike's sister, as a collection of personal essays and stories drawn from memory about the Brooklyn neighborhood where the Lee family grew up in 1973. The project went through multiple iterations, including an unsuccessful pitch to Nickelodeon as a children's television series, before Spike Lee decided to develop it into a feature film. The three siblings, Joey, Cinque, and Spike, collaborated on the final screenplay, and every significant detail of the Carmichael family's life was drawn directly from their own. The schoolteacher mother, the jazz musician father, the brownstone in Bed-Stuy, the four siblings, the street games, the neighborhood characters, and ultimately the illness that takes the family's center away from them. Jacqueline Lee, the Lee siblings' mother, died of cancer when Joey was 14 years old. The death of Carolyn Carmichael in the film's final third mirrors that loss almost exactly. And in the 30th anniversary oral history conducted by IndieWire in 2024, Joey Lee said something that many viewers who had seen the film as a warm coming-of-age story would not have expected to hear. Writing the film did not help process the grief. It was not cathartic in the way that was hoped. The death of the mother in the film is sudden, and the family simply moves on without a visible process of mourning, which Joey acknowledges was close to what actually happened in the real Lee household. The grief, in life as in the film, was never fully addressed. Making the movie did not change that. Cinque Lee confirmed in the same oral history that neither sibling had truly come to terms with the loss by the time filming was complete, and that the personal material made the production emotionally difficult in ways that a more detached creative project would not have been. The film that audiences experienced as a celebration of childhood was being made by people actively struggling with a grief they had been carrying for over a decade. That gap between what the audience received and what the filmmakers were navigating is perhaps the most significant thing most viewers of Crooklyn never figured out. The title itself, combining Brooklyn with the word crook in a way that suggested both crime and a particular kind of loving, came from the street vernacular of the neighborhood rather than from any formal creative decision. And the film's original working title, Hot Peas and Butter, taken from the name of the street game in which children strike each other with a hidden belt, captured something about the texture of childhood that the eventual title softened. The project began as a personal reckoning and was released as a family film, and the distance between those two things is where most of the complexity lives. If the grief at the film's center was the thing most viewers missed, the casting process that produced its central performance was the thing most people never heard the full story of. The casting of Zelda Harris and what nobody knew about that audition process. When audiences watch Zelda Harris move through Crooklyn as Troy Carmichael, the performance reads as completely natural, the kind of effortless, lived-in work that suggests the child simply is the character rather than playing one. What that reading misses is the scale and selectivity of the search that produced her, and the series of specific decisions made during the audition process that shaped the final result. The casting call for Troy was one of the largest open auditions conducted in New York for a film role of that era. More than 1,000 children were seen before Zelda Harris was selected. Born on February 17, 1985 in New York City, Harris had already established a presence in the entertainment world before Krooklyn found her. She had been appearing in television commercials since infancy and had been a regular performer on Sesame Street from seasons 20 through 25, working in segments alongside Muppets and participating in special productions, including Big Bird's Birthday or Let Me Eat Cake. That background in front of cameras in an educational, improvisational environment gave her a naturalness that formal acting training rarely produces in children. The audition story that Harris told in the 30th anniversary oral history contains a detail that captures both the scale of the search and the instinctive quality of what won the role. When arriving at one of the early callbacks, her mother had pressed her hair with a certain gloss and formality, a natural impulse for a parent preparing a child for something important. The pressed hair and the gloss came off. The version of Zelda Harris that had been visible on the playground, rather than prepared for a stage, was what Spike Lee was seeking, and when that version walked in, it was recognized immediately. By the time the final audition arrived, the offer came directly from Spike Lee himself, in a brief room where he said something to the effect of wanting to offer the role of Troy. Harris described her reaction as her soul leaving her body, a moment of disbelief so complete that she was simultaneously present and entirely elsewhere. On the way home, a celebratory box of French fries with her father sealed the memory of the day in a way that is very much in keeping with the spirit of the film she had just been cast in. It is the kind of detail Krooklyn itself would have included. What followed that casting was a Young Artist Award nomination for her performance, a subsequent appearance in another Spike Lee film, He Got Game, in 1998, and then a self-imposed withdrawal from the entertainment industry that surprised the fans who had connected deeply with her work. Harris has explained the departure candidly. The available roles for African-American women of her age did not reflect the kind of characters worth playing, and rather than accept diminishing or stereotyped material, the decision was made to step away entirely. Princeton University followed, with graduation in 2007 as a member of that year's class. A music career emerged under the name Zelda and the Lolos. By 2021, teaching had become the primary professional identity. A public health struggle with fibroids, shared candidly on social media, added to the picture of someone navigating a life considerably more complicated than the path from acclaimed child actress to inevitable stardom that the industry might have predicted. The distance between the 9-year-old who captured a city's attention in 1994 and the educator and musician of 2026 is not a story of failure. It is a story of someone who looked at what the industry was offering, made a judgment that the offering was insufficient, and chose differently. That kind of clarity, at any age but particularly emerging from a childhood in the entertainment world, is considerably more unusual than it looks. Let's move on to another aspect of the movie that fans never figured out: the 5-decade wait that finally ended. When Spike Lee cast Delroy Lindo as Woody Carmichael in Crooklyn, it was not the first time the two men had worked together. Lindo had played West Indian Archie, the Harlem numbers boss, in Lee's Malcolm X just 2 years earlier, a performance of such controlled menace and complexity that it announced something about what the actor was capable of in a way that the industry registered in some quarters while missing in others. The pivot from West Indian Archie to Woody Carmichael, from a commanding criminal to a jazz musician whose sensitivity and impracticality create domestic chaos while his love for his family remains absolute and evident, demonstrated a range that should have been unmistakable. It was unmistakable to those paying close enough attention. The broader industry took considerably longer to catch up. Born in Lewisham, London, to Jamaican parents who were part of the Windrush generation, Lindo grew up in London before moving to Toronto and eventually settling in San Francisco, where formal acting training at the American Conservatory Theatre in the mid-1970s placed him in the same class as a young Denzel Washington. The friendship formed there would prove significant decades later, when Washington talked Lindo out of abandoning the profession entirely, during a period when the strategic missteps Lindo had acknowledged were resulting in him being perceived as less viable and less desirable as a film actor. Washington's message was direct: the talent was too considerable to waste on a decision made out of frustration. The Get Shorty and Cider House Rules years, established a profile that generated consistent critical recognition, while the industry's highest formal honors remained just out of reach. The Good Fight television series, in which Lindo played Adrian Bozeman for 5 seasons between 2017 and 2021, provided a sustained showcase for what sustained dramatic work across a full character arc looks like from one of the best practitioners of the craft working in American television. When Da 5 Bloods arrived in 2020, and Lindo delivered a performance of staggering emotional range as Paul, a Vietnam veteran navigating PTSD and moral compromise in ways that made every scene a sustained exercise in the kind of acting that classrooms study, the recognition from critics was immediate and overwhelming. The Academy's failure to nominate that performance became its own story, with Lindo publicly acknowledging being profoundly disappointed by the exclusion. Then came Ryan Coogler's Sinners in 2025, and a role as Delta Slim, a blues musician whose scenes required Lindo to learn piano, keyboard, and harmonica simultaneously, while delivering the emotional work of a complex supporting character in a film that would go on to gross over $300 million worldwide and earn 16 Oscar nominations, the most ever for a single film at that point in the Academy's history. The Best Supporting Actor nomination that arrived on January 22, 2026, was the first Academy Award nomination of a career spanning 5 decades. Lindo was 73 years old. The response on Good Morning America the morning after the nomination was announced captured the moment with characteristic directness. It feels terrific, still processing honestly, but it is wonderful, with a lot of support and love making it feel really good. The Woody Carmichael that Krooklyn fans remember, the man who needed Delroy Lindo to bring patience and sensitivity to a character who is simultaneously infuriating and deeply lovable, was an early installment of a creative journey that took 32 more years to receive the industry's formal highest recognition. The journey from that Bed-Stuy brownstone to an Oscar nomination is one of the most quietly remarkable arcs in contemporary American acting. But while Delroy Lindo had to wait more than 3 decades for the industry to formally acknowledge what audiences had long understood, not everyone from Crooklyn traveled the same uphill road. For one cast member, the acclaim came early, it came often, and yet, it still never seemed to fully measure the magnitude of the work itself. So what does it mean when recognition isn't delayed, but still somehow feels incomplete? The actress who never stopped working and never lowered the standard. If Delroy Lindo's post-Crooklyn story is defined by the long road to formal industry recognition, Alfre Woodard's story is defined by the opposite problem. The recognition arrived early, was sustained consistently across decades, and still somehow failed to fully capture the scale of what the work actually represented. Born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, Woodard had already accumulated an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress for her work in Cross Creek by the time Crooklyn came along. 4 Emmy Awards, 3 Screen Actors Guild Awards, and a Golden Globe were already either in hand or en route. The New York Times would eventually name her one of the 25 greatest actors of the 21st century in 2020. None of that recognition, however comprehensive it appears in list form, fully prepares a viewer for the specific texture of what she does as Carolyn Carmichael, the schoolteacher mother, whose fierce love and practical exhaustion hold the household together while her husband's artistic impracticality and the neighborhood's constant chaos press in from every direction. Roger Ebert noted in his 1994 review that Woodard makes the character a good person without ever laying it on too thick, which is precisely the kind of compliment that sounds simple and represents an achievement that most skilled actors cannot consistently reproduce. The restraint required to portray someone who is right about her situation, right about her husband's financial blindness, right about the discipline the children need, and still fully sympathetic rather than merely correct, is considerable. Woodard found it without apparent effort, which is the most reliable evidence of genuine mastery. The decades after Crooklyn included 12 Years a Slave, Marvel's Luke Cage, Captain America, Civil War, the Lion King remake voicing Sarabi, and the Apple Series C opposite Jason Momoa. In 2024, the Salem's Lot adaptation and a guest appearance in the final season of Star Trek, Lower Decks, reprising her role as Lily Sloan from Star Trek: First Contact, demonstrated that the range and the appetite for interesting work remain entirely intact. In 2025, The Last Frontier for Apple TV Plus added another significant role, with Woodard playing a senior CIA leader in a drama series opposite Jason Clarke. Projects in pre-production, as of early 2026, suggest that the pace and the selectivity are both being maintained. The long-planned miniseries about Fannie Lou Hamer, the voting rights activist and civil rights leader, whose story Woodard has been developing since 2014, with an ABC signature series order placed in 2020, represents the kind of sustained commitment to material that matters that defines the choices made throughout this career. The project's path to production has been longer than anyone involved would have preferred, but the commitment to seeing it through reflects an understanding of what the story requires and what it deserves, rather than the expediency of attaching the name to something easier and faster to produce. So what kind of creative choice is worth that level of patience? A choice so bold that it left audiences puzzled for decades and forced theaters to issue explanations at the door. The anamorphic lens secret that confused audiences for 30 years. Among the many things that most Krooklyn viewers never fully figured out, the one that generates the most confusion on first viewing and the most appreciation on revisiting is a single deliberate technical decision that the studio had to physically post notices at theater entrances to explain. When Troy Carmichael travels south to spend part of the summer with relatives in suburban Virginia, the film changes. Everything visible on screen becomes compressed, squeezed horizontally in a way that makes every person appear elongated and strange. Every room feels slightly wrong. Every normal suburban detail of the relative's life looks as foreign and disorienting as if it had been filmed on another planet. Audiences in 1994 assumed the projector had malfunctioned. Some asked for refunds. Others assumed they were watching a defective print. Theaters around the country received enough complaints that the studio ultimately provided printed notices to be posted at ticket windows and entrance doors, explaining that the distortion was deliberate and that the projectionist had not made an error. The technique was the use of an anamorphic lens during the Virginia sequences without the corresponding adjustment during projection, deliberately creating the squeezed image rather than correcting it as would normally be done. Spike Lee's intention was specific and psychologically precise. For a 9-year-old girl who has never left Brooklyn, whose entire world has been the brownstones and stoops and street games of Bed-Stuy, a suburban Virginia neighborhood with its manicured lawns, split-level houses, attached garages, white furniture, and small yapping dog is not merely unfamiliar, it is genuinely alien. Everything was wrong in a way that the senses register before language can describe it. The anamorphic distortion puts that interior experience onto the screen in visual form. Cinematographer Arthur Jaffa confirmed in the IndieWire oral history that the shoot was difficult and that the experimental ambitions of the visual approach sometimes exceeded what was possible within the constraints of production. Jaffa's own vision for the film was even more expressionistic than what appears on screen, drawing inspiration from Jet magazine and the heightened psychedelic quality that childhood memory tends to give the 1970s in retrospect. The floating double dolly shot used for a dream sequence in which Troy experiences a drug-addled disorientation was one of the stylistic flourishes that survived. Much of what Jaffa envisioned did not make it to the final cut. The Jimi Hendrix story is its own small footnote in the film's history. A song by Hendrix was wanted for the dream sequence, and the rights request was denied because the Hendrix family did not want the artist's music associated with depictions of drug use. The irony of that reasoning, given Hendrix's own biography, was noted at the time by the filmmakers without resolution, and the sequence was cut without the music rather than replaced with an alternative. What the anamorphic sequence ultimately did, beyond its intended psychological effect, was create a visual grammar for the film's emotional movement. When Troy returns from Virginia and the image corrects itself, snapping back to the normal proportions of Brooklyn, the relief is physical, experienced in the body before the mind fully registers it. The technique that confused so many audiences in 1994 was, as it turned out, doing exactly what it was designed to do. But if such a deliberate choice could shape the audience's experience so profoundly, What does it mean when a film's legacy itself is quietly altered, leaving certain emotional truths harder to access? Carlton Williams and the loss the film's legacy carries. Among the things that most fans of Krooklyn never fully registered is a loss that occurred less than a decade after the film was made, and that attaches a particular weight to rewatching those childhood scenes all these years later. Carlton Williams played Clinton, the oldest of the Carmichael brothers, with the kind of physical presence and natural authority that older siblings in large families develop early and carry for the rest of their lives. Born on December 29, 1978, in New York, Williams appeared in Crooklyn at 15 years old. It was the role that defined his screen presence. On November 28, 2003, Carlton Williams died in New York City at the age of 24. The circumstances were not widely publicized, and the loss passed largely beneath the radar of the mainstream entertainment coverage that would have amplified had the subject been someone whose career had continued at greater visibility after 1994. The death of someone so young, someone whose face is permanently preserved in one of the most warmly regarded films of the decade, adds a dimension to rewatching Krooklyn that the film itself could not have anticipated. The children running through those Bedford-Stuyvesant streets, playing games that Spike Lee taught them because those games had already disappeared from the neighborhoods they were filmed in, were capturing something that had already passed. The loss of Carlton Williams at 24 added another layer to the film's elegiac quality that was never planned but cannot be unacknowledged. So, how did the rest of the cast carry the story forward, and what mark did Krooklyn leave on their lives and careers? Where the rest of the cast landed, and what the film left behind. The cast members who built careers after Krooklyn did so across a remarkably varied range of trajectories. Bokeem Woodbine, who appeared in a small role as Richard, went on to a career in film and television that included Dead Presidents, Jason's Lyric, and substantial television work across multiple decades. Vondie Curtis Hall, who played Uncle Brown, became both a respected character actor and a director, with films including Gridlocked and Redemption, the Stan Tookie Williams story among his directing credits. David Patrick Kelly, who played the neighbor Tony Eyes in a performance that is both comic and genuinely menacing, had already appeared in The Warriors and would later find a new generation of fans through Twin Peaks, a career arc that demonstrates the particular durability of a certain kind of character actor. Jose Zuniga, who played Tommy Lala, the family friend whose persistent and terrible singing becomes one of the film's running comic threads, went on to appear in Con Air, Fresh, Twilight, and numerous television productions including CSI. Chris Knowings, who played Troy's older brother, went on to television work including Nickelodeon's Tina and The Nick Cannon Show, and later joined Sesame Street alongside his twin sister Christy, in an educational capacity that connected his trajectory back to the same program where Zelda Harris had begun her journey before Krooklyn found her. The house itself has its own postscript. The 1874 Victorian brownstone at 7 Arlington Place in Bedford-Stuyvesant that served as the Carmichael family home in the film had fallen into disrepair by the time it sold in 2013, changing hands for $1.7 million. A full restoration followed. The property operated as a bed and breakfast beginning in 2015, and it subsequently sold again for $4.15 million. The neighborhood that Spike Lee was elegizing in 1994 as something already passing has since undergone the full pressure of Brooklyn gentrification, and the brownstone that housed a fictional family's grief and love now commands a price that would have been unimaginable to anyone on that street in 1973. New Yorkers also voted Krooklyn the winner of the 2017 One Film, One New York contest, selecting it over 4 other city-related films for simultaneous free screenings across all 5 boroughs on September 13, 2017. The film beat out entries from decades earlier and later alike, confirming that the audience connection to what Lee and the cast built in 1994 runs deeper than nostalgia or obligation. It is the kind of film that people return to because something in it continues to be true, even as everything around the specific world it depicts has changed beyond recognition. So what is the detail about Krooklyn that surprised you most? And do you think Krooklyn holds up in 2026 the same way it did when it first came out? Or does it mean something different now than it did then? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.